Hello and welcome to another episode of the Business of Business podcast. I'm Roy. This is a show that we bring a wide range of experts and knowledge base to the solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, small businesses to, try to help enlighten us. Sometimes as small businesses or as entrepreneurs, we may not know exactly what we don't know. And so this is a good forum for us just to talk about different topics that may help you in your business, and then also give you the resources to make some changes if necessary. Today we're going to talk about sales, and that's something we don't talk near enough about, but it's a very dear subject to my heart. I enjoy talking about it a lot, and we're blessed to have Cooper Krauss with us. He is the global sales director with Full Scale. Cooper, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking time out of your day to be here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. I agree. People don't talk about sales enough, so I love to talk about it.
Yeah. No, we talk about marketing. Everybody wants to, and not making light of that. We have to have marketing to get to sales. I get that. But it seemed like everybody's kind of piled in on that marketing space. And so that's awesome. But if we don't know how to handle the customer once we get them through the funnel to the sales portion, then it's all meaningless. So let's just kind of jump in with a little bit about what are you seeing today? I know there's been a huge environmental change for a lot of workplaces. Have you seen that it's had an impact or changed the way that you do sales? And if you don't mind, tell us a little bit, number one, about how you got here and Full Scale. Y'all have developers that you may embed in other companies. You can tell us a little bit about what that's all about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up just north of Kansas City, Missouri, in a town called St. Joe, about 70,000 people. And in 2014, I moved to Kansas City, and getting into sales was a little bit of an accident, and it turns out that I love it. So what happened was I was serving tables at a bar and grill in downtown Kansas City and was waiting on a group of about 12 people. And when I checked them out, one of the guys that I was waiting on walks up to me and says, "Hey, man, you kept that organized, no mistakes, like went well, good customer service. If you can do that, you can sell insurance." And I was like, absolutely, I'll get off the serving floor and go, sit behind a desk and try to build a career that way. So studied my insurance for property and casualty, auto home, studied that for a couple of weeks, passed that, and then eventually was able to sell life and health as well. But worked for that agent underneath of Farmers for about 2 years. And it was one of those scenarios where, like, my second day, they dropped a stack of papers on my desk, and it was, here are some names, phone numbers, and addresses. Let's see what you can do. So then you just start, burning through as many phone calls as you can possibly make. And you're trying to gather quotes for people, and you have to get some pretty intimate information about a person to get them an accurate insurance quote. So that was a really good experience to cut my teeth. So I did that for about 2 years. And then I took a role with a company called Robert Half, which is a $5 billion publicly traded staffing firm. So my first role there was in their division called Office Team. So we were staffing HR, sales, customer service, data entry, really pretty lower level roles in terms of how a corporation is generally structured. So did that, and that was heavy sales and heavy recruiting. Did well in that division, so then I got a tap on the shoulder to their accounting and finance division, and continued to do well there. And then after about 2 years there, I took a role with a larger consulting firm, and was lucky enough to be hired there as the youngest director in that company's history. And so that was a practice where I was in charge of about a $4 million book of business across the Midwest, and that business there was to help large companies with merger and acquisition transactions and system integrations. So leading that space, and all of that is really, those are all areas that I just mentioned that I had absolutely no technical knowledge or expertise around. It was just the ability to dig in, know enough to be dangerous, and know when to kind of shut up and listen to your clients. So And then in March of this year, I joined Full Scale. So that's kind of the pattern of my career so far. It's about 6.5 years. And so joined Full Scale in March as their first sales hire. So that's where I'm at now. And as you mentioned, yeah, we've got a team of 200 developers that we embed into client teams to support their development projects. That's the overall and primary Full Scale business. But we also have, and I wear it every time I'm on another podcast, is our podcast is called Startup Hustle. And that's become it's been around for 3 years, about 500 episodes, and has become a top 25 entrepreneurship podcast. 1.5 million lifetime downloads. So it's turned into a really,
that's awesome.
Thank you. Now I can't take too much credit. I'm not a part of it. It's our CEO and our other co-founder who they bring on other CEOs and CTOs and entrepreneurs 5 times a week to talk about their experience, but it's gained a lot of attention. And so due to that, we're launching a web series about entrepreneurship called Startup Hustle TV in just a few weeks. So that's a little bit about how I got here and Full Scale. Okay.
Yeah, we'll have to check that out, and I'll include that in the show notes too to, help out the entrepreneurs. We'll give them all kinds of tools, anything to help them out. So
yeah, I mean, those are shows where like the second episode is called Getting Funded Sucks. So like we really dig into, we dig into the good, the bad, and the ugly of entrepreneurship for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we get too far off into the sales, you said you came out of waiting tables, somebody noticed you. And I talk to people about that all the time for recruiting, is that you have to keep your eyes open no matter where you are. When you find somebody that can be conversational, talk to people, we can train them usually in the industry, but I can't teach people really how to be personable. I mean, that's just kind of a quality a lot of people have, or they don't, whether they're shy or just don't like to talk. It's not that it's good or bad. It's just some people are cut out for that sales role and some aren't. So you always have to be, always be on the outlook for somebody that's, good and asking questions. I think too, also starting in that insurance, because that's what I talk a lot about is, we have to ask questions. I can't just call you and say, Cooper, I'm selling this product, or, how many can I sign you up for? And maybe for lower dollar items, we can get away with that. But, when we're selling consulting services, high ticket items, I've got to try to solve a problem. Do you even need this? I mean, I got a great John Deere out here behind the barn. I'd love to sell you, but, you may not be in the market, or may not even could use a nice big old tractor. So, asking those questions right up front and get to know your prospect, that was a great start.
Yeah, but there is kind of like always a tug of war, I think, with being in the sales role, because as you mentioned, you want to listen to the client and understand what their problems are, but at the same time, you also have this requirement to tell them exactly why you're calling and gain their attention quickly and respect their time. And so there is that push and pull of I've got to get their attention immediately and be direct and honest. Like, hey, here's why I'm calling, and then try to open the conversation. So it is a bit of a juggling act.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit pre-show. One of your something that you talk a little bit about is the power of no. And so it kind of opens us up to sometimes as salespeople, we're scared of no. Sometimes we're scared of yes just as much. So, I think what, part of this is that we want to get to yes, or we want to get to no as quickly as possible. Because even if I get to no, if you're not client, that gives me a chance to move on.
Absolutely. And I think there's two sides to the power of no. Of course, the power of no, whenever, as you mentioned, we want to understand whether or not that client is interested in our product or service as soon as possible, because we're salespeople and we want to close deals ultimately. And so that's important to get there quickly, but it's also important for us to say no to clients that don't make sense for us. And that's something that I think a lot of people in the sales profession struggle with, because again, we're quota based, we're number driven. And anybody who wants to work with us, we want to say yes to. But I've got more than a couple stories of clients that I should have said no to, and ended up creating more work for me, more work for our billing team, more work for the operations team, because we brought on a client that really wasn't that good of a client. So there's kind of a two sides to the power of no.
Yeah, I mean, we have to be careful with that because, like you said, sometimes we can try so hard, and it's not that I have this problem, but there's some people that are so good at sales that they can close just about anybody, and then they end up making a poor customer. They're unhappy. Your team spends more time messing around with them, so it can be a dilemma as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit of a byproduct though of, well, at least with larger corporations that are like just large sales organizations, and they've got huge teams and huge teams of BDRs, and their quota is book this many meetings, close this many deals, so on and so forth. They're so number driven and revenue driven that those reps will do just about anything to hit those numbers to satisfy their managers who were really, they were passed down those metrics from leadership that's not even attached to the sales process. And so it's just kind of a weird trickle down scenario where those reps are just chasing those numbers, and they're going to get them at any cost. And that not a good approach.
Yeah. And I want to touch on goals here, and just one more thing about the power of no. I think too, the other thing is sometimes we think like something, your prospect says no, so we just hang up. But also sometime in between the no and the hanging up, it also gives us an opportunity to ask why, because maybe they just purchased whatever we've got. Maybe they can't afford. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but it also gives us that chance to open some dialogue to, maybe try to tell them how we can, maybe they don't know what we do or what it was all about, don't have a fundamental understanding. So anyway, I didn't want that, as much as we want to get to yes or no, just when somebody says no, it doesn't mean that we're done with the conversation necessarily. Now, I'm not a hound, and so when somebody says no, I may ask a couple follow-up questions, but I'm not one of those that sticks with them till they just slam the phone down. I want to be respectful, because just because you're not a customer of mine today doesn't mean that you won't be tomorrow. So that's another balancing act, is we have to, sometimes as salespeople, we have to push hard, but we have to push hard and still be respectful, where we can hang up the phone or we can end our meeting on friendly terms and give me another shot at you down the road.
Yeah, there's always a delicate way to handle an objection or a straight up no. And I think that one way to do that is something that buyers smell is salesmen or saleswoman being timid. And if you're being timid, then they're going to eat you alive on that phone call. And so if somebody says no, one thing that disrupts the thought process of a lot of buyers is by agreeing with them, because they're not like, wait, what? Like, yeah, no, I assumed you'd say no. I'm reaching out about next year. I mean, whatever it is, just those little things where you're like, wait, you thought I was going to say no and you still called me? Okay. Little things like that.
Right. So you mentioned goals, and that's a good thing, is that, first off, I believe I've worked for companies before that really had some good metrics, but in the end, they turned out to be a stick that, they used to club employees with at a later date. So I think as we set goals, we have to be mindful of what is accomplishable and and the quality, because I will guarantee you, I could line you up 12 phone calls for this afternoon. They are not going to be people who are going to need your services, but I can check that off my quota list. I got Cooper 12 calls this afternoon. So, it's a waste of time. And I saw this, I started out in that cold calling space as well. I work for a brokerage company. And so, when you're new, they give you the list and you sit down and make $100, $150 a day. And we had one guy that he was making about $200 a day. He was knocking them out, but the guy never opened up. was struggling. So we got the pull in and this was back in the ancient days. We thought we were lucky. We had a phone log where we could see. And, part of his 200 calls was his mother, his sister, his friend, the 7-Eleven down the way, yeah, because at the end of the day, he could say, I made all these phone calls, but they weren't to people who were going to be his customers. So, I think it's just an important thing to remember when we set objectives is they need to be in line with where we want to go. And we need to make sure that the results of that are quality.
Yeah. And I mean, with how educated buyers are nowadays, the only metric that actually matters is, did you generate the revenue with the right client? And that's never going to satisfy a publicly traded executive. If somebody's somebody's in the C-suite of a publicly traded company, that's never going to satisfy them, but that's the truth. I mean, buyers can figure out really, really quickly on their own without coming to salespeople what they need and shop themselves. And so, the metric is, did you earn a deal with the right client? And even if you look at somebody who makes 150 phone calls and they're doing the shotgun approach and they don't know why they're calling anybody. And then you look at someone who makes, 30 calls that day. But before they make each phone call, they look at that person's LinkedIn, they look at that company's website, they look at the latest news releases. That takes 5 minutes max. Probably not even that. It takes 3 minutes. And then when you call them, you can have something to talk about. You can make a comment about how many recommendations they've received on LinkedIn, whatever it may be, because if you don't, you can only call them to talk about yourself, which is the quickest way for a deal to die.
Yeah.
And you're going to get a higher response rate if you do that. So I'd rather make 30 calls and get 15 responses than make 100 calls and get 9.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes we need to choose quality over quantity for sure.
Yep.
I think you bring up a good point about our buyers being smarter now. And, I think we have to keep that in mind to meet them where they're at. It makes me feel old sometimes to have to talk like this, but back in the day prior to the internet, if you had a product or service, people may not know about it. So, it was a genuine lead in, like, hey, let me tell you about this product. Well, now, buyers
that's a good point.
Yeah, true buyers, they are on the internet and they know more about you and your competition, than a lot of salespeople that I know. So I think that, the research on who we're calling, but then also figure out where they're at in this process. And let's don't start at the ground floor with everybody like nobody knows what this product or service is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that in terms of, there definitely was a time where when you called somebody, it could potentially be the first they'd ever heard of a product or a service like that. So that is a genuine outreach. We don't really have that. I would say that's probably the only luxury that modern salespeople don't have. But just about everything else is dramatically enhanced in terms of our ability to go find prospects that make sense for us.
Right. Yeah. The internet has been, it's a great tool. I know there's a lot of, it gets us in trouble as well, but there's a lot of great tools out there if we just, know what to do and what to look for. It's and kind of going in that vein. I guess we could talk about something that you mentioned, I saw, I guess on one of your sites was dysfunctional selling. And could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. Have you ever heard of an author named Mahan Khalsa?
No.
So he wrote a book. He wrote a book that was called. What was it? I'm blanking now. It's funny because I have it right here. Sorry to do that. Oh, here it is, right there. So it's Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. And So the whole concept is kind of to put to bed the death, put to bed dysfunctional selling. And again, dysfunctional selling kind of going back to salespeople reaching out to say, hey, we've got this great product, this great service. We know you need it. Just sit down and let me tell you how it's going to work. Like that is how sales was approached for a really long time. And to your point, sometimes that actually made sense because that buyer might actually not know anything about that lane.
Right.
But with where we're at now, I mean, the truth is that there are definitely products and services out there that have unique nuances and tweaks, but not a whole lot of ideas are completely original anymore. So a lot of markets are saturated. And so the idea then with Mahan Khalsa's book is to check your ego at the door as a salesperson. So really like forget about what it is that you want, because if you forget about what you want, which is to close a deal and make money, if you forget about that, you'll end up closing more deals and making more money because you're not like, it's kind of like, well, one of my mentors, whenever I was at Robert Half, one of his first lines was the less that you think about making money, the more you have in your pocket. And as soon as a salesperson can kind of grasp that, then their success level in terms of deals closed and money earned, it really changes because they're not being selfish. I mean, who makes money being selfish?
Right. Yeah. And sometimes they just get so anxious. I've known a few like that they just couldn't even give away a glass of water in a desert because they were so anxious. And when they went in, I mean, they made the client anxious. It was not a good situation, but, having them calm down and just say, look, you can't be worrying about the future. Like I said earlier, sometimes they were scared of getting a yes. It'd be like, oh my gosh, what if they said, yeah, I'll take it. And then what?
they were anxious because they were thinking about themselves.
Exactly.
It's kind of like speaking in front of a group of people. Some good advice is just remember that it's for them. Like you're talking for them, not for you. And it can kind of relieve some pressure. So as a salesperson, if you've got, to be honest with you, I'm a great example of that, because before I was going to make my first sales call at Farmers, when I first started, I had to go to the bathroom before and gather myself because I was having a mini panic attack, because I was sitting in, it was my first sales job. We were sitting in a small office. So both of the agents that I worked for could hear me and the other salesperson who had been there for 3 or 4 years. I mean, we're all tight knit. And so, I was like, I'm going to butcher this and they're going to hear every single word of it. And then I went in there and gathered myself, came back out and did. And now I've got, very comfortable making cold calls to people that have no idea who we are. So it can definitely be overcome for sure. It's just a matter of focusing on the right things.
Yeah. You just have to focus on your customer, and you have to trust yourself too. A lot of times we don't trust ourselves that we have the answer, and that's another thing. We sometimes as salespeople we feel like we have to have the answer for every possible question that comes, and as the customer, I have more respect for the guy that says, I don't know. I mean, but I can sure find out for you. Sometimes it's like when people have the answer to everything, you might start unless they're very experienced. Sometimes I start questioning, are they just making stuff up as they're going, just where they have an answer to throw at me?
Yeah. Something to keep in mind as a modern salesperson is just like you're looking up your customer on LinkedIn, if you're doing your job the right way, they might be looking you up too. And so if you're so for example, like I'm not technical by trade at all. Like I can't write a line of code, and I sell software development services. So when I'm speaking with chief technology officers at recently funded, innovative startups, I can't BS them for 1 second, because they know when someone knows software development. And, I've been here 9 months, so I've gained some knowledge and I understand how to uncover issues. But when it gets technical, too technical. I mean, I'm like, hey, that's over my head. I've got a development manager you can talk to, but this is where it stops for me. And they get that.
Yeah, and there's no shame in that. I mean, you know, sometimes we are tasked to be sales because we're good at sales, not because we're good at code development. And I think that's something to think about in the hiring process when we look at, you know, people's resumes. Just because they may be the very best at the job, that doesn't necessarily translate into that they will make a good manager or that they would make a good salesperson for the product itself.
That is incredibly accurate there. And that's another, I would say, another fault of really large sales organizations is they have a tendency to promote the person who's closing the most deals. But there might be a reason why they're closing the most deals. Their sweet spot might be, hey, individual contributor, and they want to focus on their book of business. And so the person with, you know, maybe mediocre sales, but that leadership charisma is probably the way to go. But bigger companies, they see that person that's made all that money and they want to reward them like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's a huge mistake. And it wasn't a sales organization, but, you know, I worked for a major corporation back in the day, and our promotion process was who wants the job or who's been here the longest. I mean, it's almost like a battlefield promotion. Like, you survived the last 5 years, so now you're going to be the manager of this boat. So, you know, and that it was disastrous. And, you know, sometimes we can't get out of our own way, but, you know, there's a lot of tools out there. Do you use any specific tools for hiring?
For hiring, when it comes to hiring salespeople, the first place I'm always going to go is relationship based. So I won't even go to LinkedIn. I won't go to Indeed, because sales is a really popular profession. A lot of people do it. And to be honest with you, a lot of the processes and the approaches are really simple. Like I always say my revolutionary advice is that no advice is revolutionary. Like sales has been sales for the longest time. Like we don't need to try to rewrite it. I mean, there are differences now, obviously, between now and 30 years ago, but at the end of the day, it's still the same. And so I like to connect with people that I know to see if they know of anybody who it's like, hey, like, let's cut through the resume stuff. Let's cut through their education. Are they going to be an effective and ethical salesperson? That's the approach that I'll take. And then secondly, I'm going to go to LinkedIn. I'm probably not, to be honest, for sales, I'm probably not going to do Indeed or any of those more traditional job boards, because, you know, on LinkedIn, you might be able to identify kind of how they communicate by their interactions on LinkedIn. And that tells me much more about what I need to know opposed to what their resume looks like. I mean, to be honest, a resume means very little to me at this point. It's a little bit different than looking at, you know, have people check the boxes of what's supposed to be good on a resume.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And a lot of times people can make a resume look, they can make it look like whatever you want it to look like too. So, you know, and I think that another thing about hiring, you know, and I think we have to approach that like we do selling our product. We have to market for talent. We can't just, I'm not a big fan, you know, to me, recruiting is not putting up an Indeed post. I think that we have to have that personal knowledge and relationship. And, you know, we have to have, I kind of think of it as we have to have people on the bench that are either calling us, you know, wanting to know that we got an opening yet, or who we've identified that, you know, the next opening I have, because of things like you said, how we see them interacting in public or at other functions, if they're in the same industry, or, you know, what they post on LinkedIn, a lot of different things like that we need to take into account.
Yeah. And sometimes it's helpful to join networks that are related to your profession. So for example, I joined a sales leadership network called Revenue Collective. There's about 4,000 members across the globe. And so automatically, if you know, the next time I'm hiring for a salesperson, that's the network that I'm going to trust. And so I'm going to say, hey, either either I'm going to hire somebody who's actually in the network or talk to a leader in that network about, hey, here's what I'm looking for. Do you know of anybody? I mean, so that's another way to kind of cut through the noise.
Right, exactly. So, what about managing? First off, I assume that you have managers, or a sales force under you, but what about managing in this environment that we're in, where people are working from home? We're not all in the same office anymore, where you can stand up and look out the glass wall and see, who's sleeping and who's dialing and, what's going on. So what are you doing to, I guess, manage that process?
I think it's wonderful, honestly. I think it lets a lot of companies know that we don't need to be in the office for people to be productive. And regardless of whether you're in the office or you're working from home, the numbers tell us everything. So again, not being cold call obsessed or setting appointments obsessed, but at the end of the month or quarter or whatever your quota looks like, if the numbers are there, I do not care where you work at. That's not,
right.
As long as you and I can maintain a relationship, via Zoom and constant communication over Slack. And then, if we can safely get together every once in a while as a team or individual meetings, that's been the general approach. We've got a pretty small squad of 6. But, we got together a week and a half ago at our new office. And we were able to, stay 6 feet and go through our 2021 go-to-market strategy. And so, but really, I mean, ultimately to me, it's great for people who have always felt like we have to have the salespeople in the office to manage them. I would say that there is a potential downside, and it depends on the type of salesperson you are. And then also probably depends inherently on what type of product you're selling and just that industry, because there is something to be said for the positive energy and momentum that you can get from being in a bullpen of salespeople. I mean, that is something that I miss from time to time, and I know a lot of salespeople do. But you can try to cultivate that in other ways on virtual meetings and virtual contests and things like that.
Yeah, and I'm kind of the opposite. I think, not being in once I got out, because there was a time like I had to put a chair in front of the door of my office just because from 8 to 5, it was like, just a steady stream of people coming in. Then I could get my work done after 6 or 7 o'clock at night after everybody went home. So, I like, not having the commute, and then also,
oh my gosh, yeah.
I don't know, just not having the distraction sometimes. Maybe I'm just, I'm like a squirrel, some bright, shiny object distracts me. So, being at home, I tend to be much, much more focused.
Yeah. I mean, the time back in the commute is nice. I mean, if you can get really granular on, time back on the commute, less wear and tear on the car, less gas money. I mean, there are definitely some benefits to that for sure.
Yeah, and I think one drawback is if it's something that you're selling where you need to be in front of customers, I think that's made it a little more difficult. And I personally, that's why I like to be out, and the phones are okay, but I'd much rather be in front of people. I seem to, kind of do better there. So that would definitely be a drawback depending on what you're selling.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that it's easier to build relationships with high value clients when you get to sit down with them and shake their hand, especially if we talked about this a little bit, just the difference between a transactional, maybe, low investment sale versus something that's going to be, 6 figures, $1 million, $2 million. I mean, the transactional sale, that's something that's still going to be able to be cultivated because the client isn't trusting you with $1.5 million. But those more solution focused sales where you might be and if it's a new relationship you're trying to establish with somebody that you can't meet, and you eventually want to sell them on a $1.5 million system implementation over the course of 18 months, that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Cooper, I appreciate you taking time out of your day. It's been an awesome conversation. So what is a tool that you use in your daily life, either professional, personal, could be a habit, or just, something that you do every day that you feel contributes to your success that you just don't think you could do without?
I will give a two. I'll give two if I can.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
So one is not related to technology. One is just something that I do in the morning. So I've got this little notebook here, and it's got my kind of core virtues, core values, my purpose, and my success. So kind of have that defined. So I like to review that, and then I've got my monthly goals. So this is like December, and they're broken down in terms of professional, personal, and professional. So I like to look at that every day. So that's not so technology based, but I feel like it kind of just keeps me focused. And then the one that's technology based is Seamless.ai. It's an artificial intelligence tool that can gather contact intelligence like nothing I've ever seen. So, and with a lot of accuracy. So, I mean, you can find out the phone number, as creepy as it may sound, the home, the work, the cell, the email. Oh, wow. It'll give you all their social media pages. It'll give you the size of their company, Crunchbase News, New York Stock Exchange. I mean, it's just a full thing of contact intelligence, and you get it in a matter of seconds. So it plugs into LinkedIn. And so it just has like next to each person's profile, it has a little plugin that says Find. You click on Find, and it just scatters across the internet and gathers everything it can. And
wow,
it's insane. I mean, it saves me hours and hours and hours of time.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that one out. That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So tell people, who is your client? What can you do for them? And of course, how they could reach out and get a hold of you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So our ideal client is a startup or a small business with around or less than 100 employees that has in-house technical leadership. So a CTO or a leader of engineering. And that way they understand kind of how to lead developers to, through a complex development project. So that's really what we look for. And so really what we do is we help those companies build development teams quickly and affordably. So as I mentioned, we've got 200 engineers. Each of them have at least 5 years of experience, and they're permanent employees of Full Scale, background check, ×2 actually. They get salary, PTO, benefits, insurance, all of that stuff. So we're not waiting on clients to say, hey, I need a developer, and then we go try to find some people we don't know. We've got people on the bench all the time, and we're ready to go. And they just come with a flat monthly fee and it's a full-time resource for a flat monthly fee. They sit in Cebu City, Philippines. So there's significant cost savings, but there's not really a difference in the quality of development if you look at that, versus a developer in the US. So that's the rundown on Full Scale.
Okay. And how could they reach out and get a hold of you?
They can come to our website. There, you can book a call with me directly on our website, or you can reach out to me, Cooper@fullscale.io.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Cooper, thanks again. I appreciate it. And I appreciate everybody listening. This again has been another episode of the Business of Business podcast. You can find us at www.thebusinessofbusinesspodcast.com. Of course, we're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and also all the major podcast platforms, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify. And if we're not on one that you use regularly, reach out, let me know, and I'll be glad to get it added for you. Until next time, take care of each other.